everybody.
All of our talks over the course of the weekend have been exceptional, and we are truly honored to welcome our next speaker. But to introduce him, I'm delighted to introduce you all to Charlotte Varkal, CERN Director for International Relations. Before coming to CERN in 2016, Charlotte has held a variety of posts at the United Nations, including Associate Speechwriter to Chief of the Political Affairs and Partnership Sections, and she was a key focal point for relations between CERN and the UN Nations Office at Geneva. Charlotte is also a very strong supporter of the CERN Alumni Network, which has been established in the international relations sector. Many thanks, Charlotte.
It's truly a privilege and also quite intimidating, I have to say, to introduce our next speaker, Professor Herwig Schopper, who served as our Director-General here at CERN from 1981 to 1988, coming to CERN from a very distinguished academic career in Germany and well beyond, including as chair of the board of directors at DAISY. As Director-General of CERN, he was instrumental in ensuring the construction of the Large Electron-Positron Collider, LEP, which is the predecessor to the Large Hadron Collider now, and we are very much continuing his work now today here at CERN. Professor Schopper is an outstanding particle physicist. He's an agile and a very able leader of large infrastructures and, of course, a consummate diplomat. He's truly inspirational in all of these fields. Professor Schopper is a visionary. His ability to bring people together around science and also to persuade politicians to think beyond narrow definitions of national interest has led to the development of SESAME, the synchrotron light for experimental science and application in the Middle East, a unique regional science facility. And he's now applying these very fantastic talents in Southeastern Europe, bringing together scientists and politicians to develop the Southeast European International Institute for Sustainable Technologies, which will be a hadron cancer therapy and biomedical research center with protons and heavy ions. And this holds great scientific potential for the region. We're very fortunate to have Professor Schopper with us today to share his insights of close to 8 decades in particle physics at a global level. Thank you so much, Professor Schopper, for being with us. I have no doubt that your talk today will inspire us, as your career has done over the years, and will generate many questions. So the floor, or maybe I should say the screen, is yours. I hand over to you, Professor Schopper.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for your 2 nice words. But certainly I was very glad to be invited to talk today to the CERN alumni, which is a great pleasure for me. Now, I'm supposed to talk about science without borders and science diplomacy, which nowadays is put together usually under the general expression science diplomacy. Why it's important? Well, it's clearly that peace building is considered as a very important task of our society. Now, of course, it's clear that science benefits from international cooperation, but that is not the point. The point is that science should radiate back into politics. There's some changes by screen. Only if, and let me say in brackets, this works only, that science works into politics, if the science itself is excellent. Otherwise, I think it will not work. How can that work? Well, first of all, we can try to transfer some of our ethical standards from science, like objectivity, tolerance, with respect to race, religion, gender, and so on, into politics. And certainly, and secondly, the collaboration between scientists and politicians on concrete projects can create a lot of trust, of mutual trust. Of course, these to build up, that takes some time, and so we have to be patient. I still have a problem with my screen. Well, the best example how this works is, of course, CERN. And that requires that we go back to the foundation of CERN, which indeed was due to two initiatives. First, there was an initiative by physicists who realized that they can be competitive with American colleagues only if they put together their resources. But secondly, there was another initiative which was created by Mr. Derougemont of Geneva here, who brought together in a meeting at Lausanne in 1950, shortly after the war, the politicians from France, Italy, and England, together with German politicians, where they discussed what could one do to get together the countries which had been fighting during the war for peaceful cooperation. And they thought, well, why not using scientists? Scientists are comparatively reasonable people. Why not using science as a tool for this? And these two initiatives came together under UNESCO, at a conference of UNESCO in Florence in 1950, where the immigrant Isidore Rabi, an eminent scientist, physicist, Nobel Prize drafted a declaration which was later submitted to UNESCO and was accepted. And in that way, what I would call the CERN spirit was born, which means having an organization which has two tasks: promote science and technology, but at the same time bringing countries together. Now, after 30 years, when CERN had his 30th anniversary, I invited this Isidore Rabi to give a talk at CERN, and in his talk, he said, well, I would like to remind the physicists at CERN not to care only about particle physics, but to be aware that they are the guardians of the flame of European unity, and that this European unity should help to preserve peace in the world. And for a long time, CERN was the only organization which took care of these two topics which I mentioned. Well, you could ask now, in what concrete ways did CERN really help? I could give you a long list now, but that would take too long. If you're interested in some of the points, maybe we could come back to it later during the discussions. Sorry, I promised with my screen again. Well, let me come to spin-offs of CERN. Well, one which was just mentioned by Charlotte is SESAME, an international organization according to CERN in the Middle East. What SESAME stands for, the algorithm, it doesn't matter, I forget it, nobody knows anymore what CERN stands for. But when SESAME was founded, I insisted that it should have a name which has some meaning both in the Arab world, in the Western world. And so in the end, SESAME was chosen, which is a symbol for door opener according to the story tales of 1001 Nights. It is an offspring of CERN, as I mentioned, and it is the first international organization which was founded in a Muslim country. The first ideas came up in a meeting, in workshops which were organized by physicists working at CERN. One of them was Rubini, an Italian, the other one was Elisa Rabinovici, by the way, who had just been elected as council of the CERN Council. They then discussed how to organize workshops which would bring together Israelis and Palestinians. During one of these workshops, the idea came up, why not create an organization like CERN in the Middle East? I had retired as Director-General of CERN, so in the end they asked me, said, look, you have time now, why don't you take care of that? And I said, okay, but I said it would work only if we follow the foundation of CERN, which means under the umbrella of UNESCO. So I wrote a letter to the then Director-General of UNESCO, which was Frédéric Mayor. He picked it up immediately with great enthusiasm. He invited all the governments in the Mediterranean area, in the MENA area, to a meeting in Paris, which took place, and there it was decided really to follow up the Sesame project, and established an interim council, and I was asked to chair it. Be careful if you make any proposals, it always means additional work. Now, I will not tell you all the details, the boring details, how Sesame was established in the bureaucracy of UNESCO. It took quite some time because it has to be approved by the General Assembly of UNESCO, which involves almost 200 countries and so on. But it was approved in a record time of 2 years. And I want only to mention that in the unanimous approval, it was said Sesame is considered a quintessential UNESCO project, building capacity, combining capacity building with vital peace building through science. It is considered a model project for other regions. Now, there were problems. The first problem was that Palestine, which was one of the countries interested to join, was not recognized by Israel as a country. So at one moment, I got an invitation to visit, at that time, President Arafat was still alive at that time, and talking to him, and with a telephone in the other hand, linked to the Israeli authorities, we discussed how Palestine should be named politically correct in the convention. And after a long discussion, it was decided Palestine should be signed in the convention by PLO on behalf of the Palestinian authorities. Of course, in daily life, we scientists and otherwise we agreed to call it Palestine. The second problem was the selection of the site. We had proposals from 7 countries for 12 different sites, and there were 2 conditions for the sites. One condition was the host state should provide the land and part of the building to house the facility, but the second, more difficult condition was that every scientist from the world should be able to access Sesame and work there. And some countries were not able to guarantee that. And that we couldn't find a country which would accept the 2 conditions. So I was almost desperate. And I tell you a story now which is typical to show you how decisions are really taken in real life, not what's recorded later beautifully in minutes and so on. I didn't know what to do, so I called one of my former PhD students from Jordan, who in the meantime had become a professor in Jordan, and asked him if they could help. They said, yes, I invite you to dinners. And all essential decisions are taken at dinners or at coffee breaks, I learned. CERN cafeteria is very important from that point of view. So we had a dinner, and during dinner came also one of the royal princes and explained to him the project. He went out on the terrace with the sandy and came back, said, tomorrow you have an audience with His Majesty King Abdullah II. So second day we met King Abdullah II. I mentioned the 2 conditions. He agreed to them. I said, I cannot get it in writing. Half an hour later, I had a letter from him agreeing to these conditions. So that is how really the site was chosen. Of course, later there are formal secret votes, what have you, but that is not real reality. Now, here are the member states of Sesame, and you see, originally the idea was to bring together Israel and the Egyptians, but now there's Iran is member states, but not only Iran, but also Turkey and Cyprus. two countries which are also in big difficulties now. Apart from the member states, the number of observers, as you list here, and they are very important because they contributed to the project a lot in kind. And among them is also CERN, which helped a lot, and I cannot go into details here now. Sesame is a synchrotron light source. That means in a magnetic ring, electrons are running around very fast, sending out very strong light in the tangential direction. And this light is not only very strong, but has also a number of properties which are unique. For instance, they cover the whole spectrum from infrared region to X-rays, and have other special properties which are very useful for all kinds of investigations. So what can be done with such a light source is research from biology to material science to environment, even to archaeology and things like that. Here you see the building of Sesame and adjoining building. And of course, one of the major objectives also was capacity building, to train young scientists who would work at the source and also operate the accelerator at a later time, and in general terms create a users community. To do that, we got a lot of support of money from the International Atomic Agency in Vienna, which provided money for fellowships and all kind of other help. We had users meeting. The first users meeting was financed by Japan. And if you look at it carefully, you can see an Israeli standing next to an Iranian, next to a Palestinian, and so on. The second users meeting, I think is quite remarkable, was held in Iran, and more than half of the users who were interested were women. Of course, to stabilize such a project in this critical zone, it needed some neutral elements, and one of the neutral elements was the agreement that the President of Council should not come from a member country, but should be a neutral person with some experience in international negotiations. I was the first president, and when I had enough after 10 years, I was asked to propose someone else, so I stepped by one of my successors of DGs of CERN, Llewellyn Smith, and now it's Roy Feuer, the other president of Sesame. So DGs of CERN played a very important role there. But more important is that there are two vice presidents of council, and they are elected. And it happened that during elections, an Iranian voted for a Palestinian, and a Cypriot voted for a Turk, and vice versa. So you see, science for peace really can work. Sesame started operation in 2018, really. The machine is working very well, and in general, Sesame is considered a great success, which was recognized by the American Association, AAAS, which recognized all this. And I must say, in spite of all the political problems there, this is not the main problem. The main problem Sesame has now is really management of resources. There's a lack of money to pay staff, and the resource is not fully used. Now, not enough. Following this suggestion of UNESCO to create more such CERN-like operations in other regions, I made a proposal during a meeting in Dubrovnik in 2016 to create an organization also in the Balkan region, which is called CEAST. A terrible name. I had hoped it would be forgotten within a short time, but now it is still staying there. Why in the Balkan? Balkan is a region with long history of being part of Europe. It needs development in many domains. The There is frictions, say it mildly, still between countries after civil wars, which existed only a few years ago, and EU is prepared to finance a flagship project there. So the first step to make this a real project was a meeting of ministers of science at CERN, which could be organized thanks to the understanding of Fabiola Gianotti, the GG of CERN, where this first-time ministers from these 10 countries met. They decided to set up a kind of international steering committee, which is kind of pre-council, and I was asked to be a member of that also. Here's a picture. These are the countries of the region participating. One of the big problems, of course, is that Kosovo is not recognized by Serbia. It's strange how history is repeating itself. The same problem we had with Palestine and Israel, we have now with Serbia and Kosovo, but we hope we can again solve it as we solved it for Sesame. It is a facility for tumor therapy and biomedical research with heavy ions. Usually tumor is treated by radiation with X-rays or electrons, but heavy ions are much more relevant because, as this graph shows, they deposit most of their irradiation dose at the place where the tumor is, whereas X-rays are distributed all over the tissue. Here you see already a number of such facilities existing in Europe, but there's none in the region here. And most of the existing facilities deal only with protons, not with heavy ions like carbon nuclei. And therefore, a facility of that kind here in the Balkan region would be interesting not only for that region, but for Europe as a whole. Thanks to the help of Commissioner Buedas, who gave us some money to start the project and all, and with the great help of CERN and some other project, a first concept for such a machine, a new machine, was worked out. The accelerator, a linear accelerator with a synchrotron combined, and here are the beams for irradiation. And this concept was appreciated very much by a number of committees in the EU, so the technical concept seems to be fine. It's still true that EU is prepared to finance a flagship project in the region there, but they said it can only be approved if there is a convention signed by the countries which would guarantee that the laboratory would be operated after its construction, and we must know a site. Now, how to come to a conclusion for that? What is missing now is a political umbrella, because for CERN and Sesame we used UNESCO as a political umbrella, which is missing here. So when I saw no way out, I turned to the Swiss Minister of Research, Cassis, and asked him whether Switzerland could provide this kind of science diplomacy help to solve these questions of the coming to a convention and to a site selection. So he agreed, the Swiss government totally agreed. So 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting at Bern. Here you see in the middle, Foreign Minister Cassis. Here are the delegates of the countries. There's some other important persons there, like the Director-General of CERN, Fabiola Gianotti, and so on. So we had this very confidential meeting in a way, but the outcome was the following. The outcome was that 10 countries agreed to follow up this CEASE project. They agreed to set up 2 committees, one working out a convention following the CERN convention more or less, and the second one proposing how to select the site. And it was also agreed that both these committees would be chaired by a Swiss ambassador, Ambassador Esteban. So with that outcome, I am now hoping that the project might have a chance to succeed. Of course, there are still many problems, political and other problems, to be solved. My epilogue: CERN has been the source of peace building on the regional domains. But now if you look at CERN, you see a map of CERN and the countries which participate at CERN, there are hardly any countries left which are not participating in activities of CERN. So CERN is becoming a global player, and maybe one could now speculate whether CERN could play this peace-building task not only in the regions but maybe on the global side. But our chair, Charlotte Varkal, is much more competent perhaps to answer these questions. I can't do it. Now, I think in the times where there's so much hatred and violence between countries, it's still gratifying that not only scientists but also politicians sit together, countries with friction, even hatred, and discuss together completely peacefully common project. And the last slide, which in a more funny mode. Look, I think sometimes what will happen 500 years from now when archaeologists will excavate the tunnels of CERN, and they will be astonished. There are round tunnels, what for? With an extremely correct geometry, what for? So they will come to the conclusion, must have been a kind of Stonehenge, a place of worship. Or they will say, maybe it was a political symbol. And if they come to that complete conclusion, perhaps they will not be completely wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Schopper. So inspiring and very moving. And thank you also for looking ahead to what archaeologists may think of CERN in 50 or 60 or 100,000 years' time. Thank you so much. We have so many questions for you. We only have about 5 to 10 minutes, so I am going to have to sort them a little bit. And you have really given us so much to think about. And you have already, if you will, almost made a bridge to the questions yourself by asking whether CERN can play a role on a global level, bringing nations together. You mentioned how vast it is in terms of the number of users we have. And one of the questions we've had is, after Sesame, after SEIST, which region of the world could next benefit from applying CERN's model of international collaboration?
Well, of course, there have been already suggestions. And one region which was considered was in Africa, was South Africa. And in fact, they made some first step to follow our procedure of Sesame, but that has not worked so far. Another region is the Far East. I had been invited some years ago, 2 years ago, to Vietnam, and met there the president and also the government. And there's an institution there which is interested in following that up. And they said they might follow up this idea and try to create such an organization in Southeast. And Singapore apparently is very much interested to participate.
Thank you very much. Obviously, you touched very much upon the relationship between politicians, politics, and science and scientists. And one of the questions is about how science is perceived in society, talking about how science is neglected today. So should scientists be more involved in politics and more directly involved in politics, in your view?
Well, probably scientists should not be directly involved. There are two different businesses, politician and scientist. But I think as more and more of the problems politics is dealing with has to do with science, I think the politicians should better understand how science works in general, what are the methods of science, and we scientists should better understand what are the boundary conditions for politicians. I think one of the problems is that this truth in science is quite okay, but to make predictions from facts of science involves models, and models are sometimes make assumptions which are not strictly true. So that is, I think politicians should understand about the work of science.
Thank you very much. I think wise words. We have a couple of questions around education and the role of education, and also how to deal with a science non-scientific literate society. How can we improve this situation? And the answer to that seems to be education. So what is your suggestion to teachers today in terms of teaching science and also science diplomacy and the role of science in society?
Well, I had been professor in Germany and other places for quite some time, and I regret, I must say, that if you had very good students, you always said, oh, they should stay in research, and the not so good should become teachers. That was completely wrong, because a bad teacher can spoil generations of young people. And I am very glad in that respect that CERN has a program to train school teachers. And in fact, I was involved with some program with UNESCO where we helped to extend that from the member states of CERN to other countries. So I think that is very important. That's the best thing we can do to help to train school teachers, because they are essential to train the new generation which will come up in the coming years.
Thank you very much also for the strong support for the teachers. I know that many of our former teachers are with us during this weekend of reunion, so I think they will be very happy to hear your support for them as well. Of course, you yourself have inspired many. You continue to inspire through what you do. So we have one question that revolves around also your experience, and what achievement are you most proud of in all that you have achieved over your very distinguished career?
Sorry, that I didn't acoustically, I didn't completely understand your question.
Okay, so what achievement in your career are you most proud of?
Well, that's a hard question. Look, I was so lucky becoming so old. I had not one career, but as you mentioned in your introduction, in a way I had two careers. And one career as a scientist, after that I had a career as a manager, and now I have a career as a kind of diplomat. So I think in each of the three domains, I'm proud of some achievements, but it would be too long to discuss it here, but you would be bored.
Thank you very much. And I think also you have given us some very good advice today. You said you must be careful when you make a proposal, because inevitably it will generate a lot of work. So we will take that into consideration. We of course also have some questions around the relationship between CERN and Sesame and also SEIST. There's a specific question around what is the role of CERN in relation to Sesame today?
Well, look, Sesame, as I mentioned, has political problems are not so big. One of the main problems is finding support to hire staff, because there could be many more beam lines at Sesame to exploit it fully. And we got a lot of help from observers, as I mentioned, and CERN is one of them, helping to install beam lines or helping to improve the accelerator. I didn't have time to mention it, but the injector for the main ring at Sesame was a gift from Germany, which was a machine, was called Bessie-1 in Germany, which was given to start the project. And this is now a somewhat old-fashioned injector, so the operation could be improved much more if a new injector could be built for Sesame, and that is being discussed and followed up. If this so-called this injector could be replaced by a linear accelerator, and certainly CERN probably could help to achieve that, not to pay it, but technically and otherwise help to improve that. So as far as the upgrading, and you know from CERN, these accelerators every 10 years need upgrading because they're always improving. There, I think CERN could help a lot.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. We have more questions, but we're not going to be able to take all of them because it has been such a rich presentation, not only looking back, but also bringing really fresh information from the meeting in Bern only just a couple of weeks ago. It shows how much is still happening. It has been an absolute honor for us to have you with us, Professor Schopper. We could not have had a better person to talk about science diplomacy. Thank you for what you have done for CERN and for so many regions across the world, and thank you for inspiring us through your example. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Charlotte, very much for